Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are strapping in and diving straight into the cockpit to unpack one of aviation's most misunderstood but absolutely life-saving maneuvers. It's called the balked landing, or as you probably know it, the go-around. Now, if you've ever been on a commercial flight that suddenly just roared with power and pitched up right before touching down, you've actually experienced this firsthand. It can feel a little scary, right? But today, we're going to break down exactly what happens in those tense moments, sticking strictly to the official procedures that pilots drill relentlessly.
We're going to start right off the bat with this incredibly powerful aviation mantra: if it's not right, go around. It's better to explain why you did it than others to find out why you didn't. I mean, wow, that's not just some catchy bumper sticker. That is the absolute foundational psychology of safe flying. It's there to completely normalize hitting the abort button. Sometimes there's this subtle pressure to just force a messy landing so you stay on schedule, or maybe you don't want to look inexperienced. But this quote reminds every single aviator that choosing not to land is actually the heroic, safety-first call. Because trust me, the alternative, having investigators sift through wreckage to figure out why you forced a bad landing, is completely unacceptable.
So here is our flight path for this explainer. We'll start with the core philosophy of when in doubt, go around. Then look at the exact triggers that force a pilot's hand. After that, we're getting highly technical with the mechanics of the Flap 30 and Flap 20 procedures, and we'll wrap the whole thing up with the pilot's golden rule. Let's get into it.
Kicking things off with Section 1, that foundational philosophy of when in doubt, go around.
For those who might be new to the exact terminology here, a balked landing is just a technical term for a go-around. Basically, it's a missed approach procedure, often using what's called a power attitude trim sequence, and it is strictly carried out when a safe touchdown and a comfortable stop within the runway confines just cannot be pulled off. And I really want you to focus on that phrase, comfortable stop. It is not just about forcing the aircraft's rubber onto the tarmac. If that plane cannot stop safely within the specific, confined space of that exact runway, the approach is void. The pilot has to abort, climb out of there safely, and reset the whole thing.
Moving on to Section 2. What actually triggers this? Why do pilots abort at the very last second?
Well, we can actually sort these triggers into two main buckets. First up, we've got environmental and external factors. These are things entirely outside of the pilot's control that instantly make the runway unsafe. Just imagine you're on short final approach, literally seconds from touching down, and suddenly you realize the runway is occupied. Maybe it's another plane, a stray maintenance vehicle, or even animals. Or maybe you're just a bit too close behind another jet that hasn't cleared the tarmac in time. Plus, Mother Nature gets a vote, right? If conditions are just too severe for the pilot's experience level, and our sources specifically point out things like turbulence, sudden wind shear, heavy rain, and extreme crosswinds, then the pilot absolutely must initiate the go-around, no questions asked.
The second bucket is all about internal or pilot-centric factors, and this is where true pilot discipline shines. A go-around is mandatory if the approach is unstable. We're talking about the airspeed or the flight path just being off. If the plane isn't perfectly aligned with the runway centerline, or if the pilot is struggling with directional control, the landing is off. Speed way too high, speed too low, too high up as you cross the threshold to manage a comfortable stop, bam, go-around. But honestly, the most vital triggers are often psychological. If the pilot just isn't mentally or physically at ease, they pull up. And if they accidentally bounce the landing, experience a balloon effect, or get caught in a pilot-induced oscillation, you do not try to salvage it. The only correct response is the balked landing.
All right, on to Section 3. Let's get our hands on the controls and look at the actual Flap 30 procedure.
The physical workload required in the cockpit when an aircraft is down in a full Flap 30 configuration is incredibly intense. This is absolutely not a passive event. The pilot has to execute these next steps with lightning precision. First, they have to push that throttle smoothly to full open. Almost simultaneously, Step 2 kicks in, retracting the flaps smoothly from 30 degrees up to 20 degrees, and while they're doing this, they are literally wrestling the plane. They have to actively counteract a massive pitch-up in yawing tendency caused by all that sudden power, so they're pushing forward on the control column and working the rudder. Once they've stabilized that beast, Step 3 is letting the speed build up to 60 knots, calling out positive acceleration. Finally, the moment the vertical speed indicator shows they are actually going up, calling out positive rate of climb, they lock in that climb at exactly 60 knots.
Now here's the absolute kicker with this setup. If the aircraft is operating with full flaps, the pilot has to be mentally prepared to see only an incredibly slight increase in speed and rate of climb at first.
The drag on an airplane in this configuration is just massive. It's kind of like driving on the highway with your parking brake ripped all the way up. It requires deliberate, precise control and just a ton of patience. You can't panic when the plane doesn't instantly rocket into the sky. You just have to trust your instruments and fly the procedure.
Once the pilot fights through those chaotic first few seconds and safely hits 200 feet above ground level, or AGL, they pull the flaps up to 10 degrees. Then, passing 300 feet AGL, they retract the flaps all the way to 0. Only after passing that 300-foot safety marker and completely cleaning up the drag do they finally let the plane transition to a faster climb rate of 79 knots and properly trim it out for steady flight.
Now, let's see how changing the starting configuration alters the workload. Here's Section 4, the Flap 20 procedure. If we look at these side by side, starting your approach in a Flap 20 setup actually streamlines the pilot's workload pretty significantly compared to Flap 30. With Flap 20, you totally skip that high-stress initial step of wrestling the flaps up while simultaneously gunning the engine. Instead, you just go straight to rolling the throttle smoothly to full open. Now, you still have to be totally ready to fight off that strong pitch up and yaw with the yoke and rudder, but it's one less mechanical step to worry about. From there, it's the exact same playbook. Let the speed hit 60 knots, confirm a positive climb, and hit those exact same 200-foot and 300-foot AGL cleanup milestones we just talked about.
And finally, Section 5. After all that chaos, how do pilots manage the workload? Enter the pilot's golden rule.
Look, after going through all these intense, sensory-heavy physical steps, juggling the throttles, the flaps, pitch, yaw, speed, the pilot falls back on one final, absolute, non-negotiable rule of prioritization. Like our source text emphasizes, a pilot should never, ever hurry to communicate. The rule is simply aviate, navigate, communicate. First things first, you fly the airplane. You keep it in the air. Second, you navigate. Make sure you aren't about to hit a mountain or veer into other traffic. Only after the plane is physically flying safe and on the right path do you even think about picking up the radio to talk to air traffic control. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. We've just spent the last few minutes exploring a highly technical procedure that's literally designed to keep hundreds of people safe by totally normalizing the decision to abort. But how can this exact go-around mindset, recognizing when conditions just aren't right, pushing past your own ego to pull up, and strictly following that aviate, navigate, communicate framework, actually help you safely abort failing projects or navigate high-pressure decisions in your everyday life? Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself forcing a landing that just doesn't feel right. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.